Normally, I make videos about Magic the Gathering. This is also a video about Magic, don't worry, but it's specifically a video about Baldur's Gate 3 and its companion set, Battle for Baldur's Gate. It would be easy to make a deck for each companion, and even each character in the game, but I was thinking, what if I wanted to build a deck for a whole party? What's the best Baldur's Gate party I can assemble in Magic? And for that matter, what's the best party I can assemble in Baldur's Gate 3? What would best even mean here? I'm going to start by saying that optimization is a tool to use to have more fun. The only real best party is the one that you have the most fun with. But would it be possible to build a party that maximizes the quality of the story this game is telling, while also maximizing power and utility? One thing I want from this is to be able to play Honor Mode. You don't have to play it that way, it is after all a very different way to engage with the game, but it is also the game mode that's closest to a full D&D experience. So I want this party to be Honor Mode viable. It should also not step on the toes of its party members. These builds should not be parasitic. I don't want my party members fighting over gear. I also want a lot of coverage. I want my party to be able to confidently handle any situation thrown at them. And just like in Magic, the best builds come online early and stay strong throughout the game. So we'll prioritize builds that can power up early. On the subject of story, even though I know it's possible to cheese a lot of the game because of how customizable each character is, I want to cut down on as much of that as possible. I want to keep character classes somewhat faithful to their story arcs as well. So Karlach shouldn't be a cleric, Asterion shouldn't be a paladin, and Shadowheart shouldn't be a barbarian, and so on. I'm also looking at how much there is to do in a character's story, how the events of that story impact the rest of the game, and of course, how much emotional weight it carries. Karlach's story is enough to bring someone to tears, but I don't think I've heard of anyone being so emotional about Minsk. Now, with that out of the way, the only other unchangeable thing about each character is their race and the bonuses they get from that. I'll use the context of a Magic card to help elaborate on this, since that's what you'll be familiar with if you've been watching the channel. As a Tiefling, Karlach gets fire resistance, one of the most common damage types in the game, as well as some smites from her Legacy of Avernus. But those smites require concentration, which breaks whenever you use Barbarian Rage. She also gets an Athletics proficiency, which will make her good at shoving enemies, and her ability to use soul coins does the most work when executing as many attacks as possible. Altogether, these mean that just like her actual Magic card, Karlach wants to get in melee combat range and smash enemy faces with enthusiasm. As a gift, Lae'zel picks up an enhanced jump as well as a Misty Step, which are really good for any class really, since mobility is so strong in this game. Lae'zel starts the game as a fighter with a really decent set of armor, and there's a whole treasure trove of Githyanki specific items that complement that build available in Act 1, including armor and a few weapons stronger than the Everburn Blade that you don't have to cheese in order to pick up. Fighter is also just an inherently a strong class in D&D and in Baldur's Gate, and the item synergies just put this over the top for us as another melee fighter. But that's bad news for our fiery friend. The problem is in what roles these two fill in our party. Both of them really want to be our damage dealers, and neither of them are naturally drawn towards softer skills, support, or crowd control. Having both of them means we waste party space and lose valuable coverage, so we probably have to choose between one of them for the purposes of this challenge. I love Karlach's story. It cannot be overstated how easy it is to fall in love with Karlach's character. But one of my considerations is how heavy that character's story weighs on the gameplay. How much is there to do? How much does it change how we play the game? How does it change how we understand the story? And when it comes to Karlach, as it's written in the game, it's just not there. Karlach's story is a dazzling, brilliant blaze, illuminating a love of life, but also rage, fear, loneliness, anguish, and grief. But much like a flame, as far as the game is concerned, that story is ephemeral. It has emotional brilliance, but you can't hold it. It has no real weight.
The weapon. Give it to me.
Do it. Do not disobey the Inquisitor. My queen.
You taught them well, my child. My Lae'zel.
Chma Zala Vlakith. You know me.
Lae'zel, you are named Hashalak. Bend your head, for my blade is ready.
Rai, please, summon Vlakith. There's much...
Irrelevant, Geik wretch. The Queen has spoken. Your death is decreed.
You realize what Lae'zel doesn't? Whatever the outcome of your visit to the Astral Prism, Vlakith had no intention of letting either of you live.
Vlakith. Vlakith! I have wielded your fury as a blade, roared your wrath as a dragon. You promised ascension. Yet I crawl among my own people, low as an asp's belly. Shkageth! I followed your path. What good? This heart of stone, for it to be shattered. She tests me. A trial of faith. Kalir prepared me. Only the heaviest souls soar to the astral. Yes. Yes. I might gain Vlakith's favor yet. Silence! I must think. I am Vlakith's most loyal servant. She will not abandon me.
Lae'zel's story is the Baldur's Gate story. She makes this a completely different game. There is a whole region in Act 1 intimately connected with the events of Acts 1 and 3, and Lae'zel's participation in those events canonically changes the fate of the multiverse. There is no story with more weight on the game than hers. She starts the game as abrasive, difficult, proud, and needlessly, excessively violent. Lae'zel is very easy to dislike, but as she adventures alongside you and learns from you and your companions, Lae'zel grows.
Lies, Lae'zel, every last one. There is no purification, no ascension.
Vlakith Kosivim Hrath Crashed. Only in Vlakith may we find light. If Voss speaks true, if ascension is a lie, if tadpole purification is a fairy tale, then I have not sinned against Vlakith. She has sinned against me.
By the time it was over, I had a very different emotional response. I was proud. Lae'zel's story is in a league of its own. I say all of this just to illustrate how worthwhile all of these companions are, even the ones we don't end up playing with. But we can only have 4 in a party. We have to prioritize somehow. Because of her easy access to powerful itemization, powerful story beats, powerful attacks, and powerful abilities, I think Lae'zel needs to be our first party member. Now, there are actually 2 really important characters to talk about who are not listed here. 2 party members you'll never meet in-game unless you choose to play as them. The Dark Urge and your custom character, Tav. Unlike our other party members who have more restrictions, these characters have a lot more flexibility in how we build them than the other party members. But Dark Urge just has more story than Tav does, and can also pick up a few items and abilities that a custom Tav character cannot. So in both story quality and in utility, Dark Urge is better than Tav. But that doesn't mean you have to play as the Dark Urge. Playing an origin character as one of your party members can provide some extra content to their story that you wouldn't get otherwise. Though, in my opinion, you already get 95% of each story playing as Tav or the Dark Urge, but you see 0% of the Dirge story by playing as an origin character. So I'm already really inclined to choose Dark Urge here. But if that's not enough, it should be worth saying that there is a colossal difference between watching Prince Zuko break down and beg for his uncle's forgiveness, and being Zuko choosing an apology as a dialogue option. These are very different experiences, and one of them drastically reduces the emotional weight the story holds. I think for that reason alone, the best party will be led by the Dark Urge. With all of that in mind, and knowing how we're making decisions about who to include, it should surprise no one that our next party member is Asterion. I've already labeled his as one of the better stories, and his default proficiencies cover a lot of our soft skills too. There aren't really any other characters this would conflict with. The build I have in mind for him comes online really quickly, with the wealth of equipment available for him in Act 1, and he's another character whose resolution left me feeling proud of their decisions. So I'm moving on to our last character. With Lae'zel as our main brawler and Asterion covering a lot of our soft skills, we need to fill out crowd control and supporting roles. Because our party phase will be so flexible for what roles they can fill, we'll first look at which companions can fill out which slots most easily. I think Will and Gale could easily be crowd control, and Minthara and Shadowheart could really easily fill out supporting roles. But out of these, I'm most interested in Shadowheart and Minthara. Shadowheart's story quality speaks for itself, taking second place overall. And Minthara is a really complex character, but ultimately didn't have much to do for her story, and has relatively little impact on the game overall. Gale's story will really happen regardless of how included he is in the party, and while Will has some deeply personal choices to make, he doesn't ever actually change much during our journey. These arcs fell really flat to me, and while Shadowheart's story is more of a jagged edge than a continuous arc, she has a lot more to do and say about the events of the story, and is my pick for our final party member.
I'd be worm food if it wasn't for you. Thank you.
Normally I'd talk more about how I'm planning on building these characters, but actually, I'm really just interested in playing through the game with these fine people. I recorded my first successful honor mode playthrough using these builds, so if you're interested, come watch me try very poorly to complete honor mode for the first time in a playlist I'll link up here when it's uploaded. In the meantime though, let's build a commander deck.
You're the author of your own tale now. Well done.
Of the 10 party members that have cards, Minsc and Boo has the broadest color identity, allowing us to play with Will, Karlach, Lae'zel, Halsin, and Jaheira. While I think this is a great way to include as many party members as possible, I have a rule for my theme decks. The cards in my theme have to actually contribute to my game plan, and these cards don't really have a lot in common. Halsin is a more efficient way of pumping Boo, making Minsc obsolete and competing for our mana. Lae'zel isn't doing much either, because none of these cards are doing anything with counters. Overall, I'm not fond of Minsc as the commander here. Our next best color identity is black-white, giving us access to 4 named party members, and even the Haunted One background to stand in for the Dark Urge if we wanted. Having Lae'zel as commander asks for counters, which only one of our party members can provide, so that's out. Shadowheart as a commander cares about high power creatures, which can synergize with everyone but Asterion, who really wouldn't have a place in that deck. Likewise, none of these other party members are great at gaining life, making opponents lose life, or even just ramping into Asterion, so I don't think that build really works here either. Instead, I think the crown jewel of this challenge is a Minthara build. Shadowheart sacrifices creatures, which is an easy way to trigger Minthara, and Minthara's power boost pumps the creatures that Shadowheart would be sacrificing for even more cards. Lae'zel doubles the speed at which we get experience counters, and can also further pump up any creatures with +1/+1 counters. And with enough damage on board, Asterion can act as a finisher, letting us double the damage we deal to one unlucky opponent each turn. With enough elves and clerics, even a Haunted One standing in for the Dark Urge and a Moon-blessed cleric to find it can be relevant to these abilities. There are a lot of clerics and a lot of D&D treasure makers that can ramp and trigger Minthara early, and we can even wield a selection of gates for our mana base. It really seems like the best leader of a Baldur's Gate party deck is going to be Minthara. So here's how I'd build it. Minthara's ability to get an experience counter relies on our ability to get our permanents off the battlefield, and since this generates value over time, we want to do this as early as possible. Once we have at least one counter though, we turn on a lot of proliferate technology as well. Since Minthara is a board-wide boost, we also get the most value when we control the most creatures. And since tokens are some of the most disposable permanents, this is a great candidate for a tokens deck which can help us go wide as well. Getting cards off the battlefield doesn't have to mean sacrifice though. Blinking out some of our creatures would also be a way to get Minthara to trigger. However, token strategies don't often work well together with blink effects, since blink effects don't protect our tokens. And furthermore, when we are using blink spells to protect our board, it's happening on someone else's turn, so that blink won't trigger Minthara. We'll keep an eye out for particularly strong synergies, but otherwise, I don't think this is a blink deck. I think this needs to be a sacrifice deck. Lastly, you might have guessed this given the video you're watching, but this is a theme deck. What that means to me is that I still want to be playing into my commander's strategy to a degree, but emphasize the cards that can do this while being on theme, even if they're less efficient. My preferred method of doing this is by dreaming up what I think would be a more optimized list, and then swapping some of those cards out for cards that are on theme, even if they're less efficient. This way, while the deck will be slightly lower power than an optimized Minthara build would be, it should still maintain a strong focus, and be able to close games while staying on message. I'll link to the alters I'll be making of some of the cards I'll be using in the description. But for the most part, I'm trying to avoid too many references to characters outside of the Forgotten Realms of Faerun and Baldur's Gate. Some exceptions can be made, however, for cards that evoke moments from the game as long as they're not too heavy on referencing specific characters. To start with, I won't be including these legends. Not only are they far outside the scope of our theme, but these effects aren't even on task as we need our cards to be. Bartolome getting counters is not a benefit we want from our sack outlets, and neither is draining an opponent a payoff we really need. Daxos is the best of these three since it makes tokens and can theoretically be another source of experience counters, but we don't have a ton of enchantments in the deck, and ultimately this is not thematic enough to be worth the inclusion. We'll swap them out for these cards instead, picking up 2 card draw engines as sack outlets and a token making sacrifice payoff to be more relevant than a life drain sacrifice payoff. Out of these 3 cards, the only one that I really think belongs in a more optimal list is Denethor, but even then it's on a slim margin, because as a sack outlet, it doesn't actually generate us any more advantage than we had before. Sun Titan doesn't help us go wide, and while it definitely reanimates some of our non-token sacrifices, since we're already on the tokens train, it's more likely that what we sacrifice is instead a token, and at 6 mana, I really can't justify it. Lastly, the sad robot at 4 mana is fighting for our resources on turns that we cannot spare it, when we need to get Minthara out as soon as possible. Once she is out, we need to continually be sacrificing a permanent each turn, but this costs so much mana that we're not likely to have anything left to sacrifice with. We'll swap them out for these cards instead. Myriad means we can get extra bodies that also automatically leave each turn, and the Staff of Completion's every mode is useful to us, letting us ramp, proliferate, draw, and even get our own permanents off the battlefield at a pinch. Flicker Wisp is a perfect example of a card that belongs in a blink deck when what we really want is to be sacrificing. But Despark and Dam are just not efficient enough for the kinds of removal that we need to be running in this deck. Instead, we'll be playing Fleshbag Marauder as an alternative to Flicker Wisp, since not only does that give us a trigger on Minthara, it also removes opponents' creatures. Rite of Oblivion can get one of our creatures off the board, allowing us to interact with other opponents at the same time, and has Flashback as an extra bonus. Lastly, Citywide Bust is a one-sided sweeper, which we actually need in this deck since we're playing a creature strategy. Dam is going to be much, much worse for us here. I won't do a lay of the land or a timeline today since I think this video is already pretty long and we've already talked about the roles these cards play in the deck after getting Minthara ticking as soon as possible. What I will say though is that this deck really surprised me in how well it came together. It's pretty rare that Magic design philosophy has given us many ways to include so many members of another setting like this in a way that synergizes so well, and I certainly don't think this one was intentional. The 14th Doctor is a great example of a deck that can do this, but you can't play all the Autobots together, or all the Decepticons, and have it be led by a member of their faction. You can put all the Stranger Things characters together, and even many members of the Fellowship, but they don't necessarily synergize very well with each other beyond just a good stuff pile. This deck stands out to me in that it's focused on achieving its goals while also still feeling true to the Baldur's Gate experience, and that's how I want to build theme decks going forward. A very special thanks to all my amazing patrons. When I started this channel, I wanted to talk about deck building decisions with my videos, but in practice what ends up happening is that I talk for 30 minutes about all the nuance of a deck, which is longer than I'm comfortable with posting to YouTube. Here, patrons can request priority deck techs, access extended discussions on their favorite decks, in-depth guides on complex game actions, and more.
So if you enjoy this content, consider becoming a patron today. One of the things my patrons have made possible is a special series of deck techs that I'm really excited to show off to you guys. When I finally get them all uploaded, I'll be giving away a special collection of altars and tokens that I've made, corresponding to each deck on the channel. For example, for the Merkle Lord of Bones deck, the prize is a set of double-faced altars of the most prominent cards in the deck, whose backsides are set in the constellation frame with updated text to show that they're acting as enchantments now. For every 1,000 views on each video, I'll increase the prize pool for that deck. All you have to do to be eligible to win is be subscribed to the channel.
Consider supporting the channel today. If you like this video, here are some of the decks I'm working on next, so if you like what you see, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any, and check out the playlist in the top left for more. Thanks for watching!